right, guys. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Didn't really have a choice. All right, well, I think most people here are familiar with what happened. Most people were around when it happened. But for those who are new, for those who haven't heard the story, can you just share with us what transpired last October?
Yeah, so we live out in Catcliffe, Rotherham, and we were, it was October, I think 19th, 20th, somewhere around there. We were actually, as a family, getting ready to go away to Slovenia for a conference. For those of you who don't know, Antioch is part of a network of churches all around the world, and they have a conference every 2 years to come together for training and so on. And we were getting ready to head off to that on the Saturday, and Storm Babette came through and just kind of battered the whole of the UK, really, with torrential rain and wind, and there's lots of drama just the day before surrounding that, but we kind of had most of the staff actually at our house spending the night, because we were due to leave kind of 6 o'clock in the morning the next morning and head off to Slovenia, and we kind of spent the night and woke up the next day kind of bright and early, kind of getting breakfast, getting ready, and then just literally about 5 minutes before we were due to leave the house, we had a knock on the door, and it was the fire brigade telling us that we needed to evacuate because there was a chance that the house might flood. And we weren't even kind of really aware of there being an emergency. The rain had kind of calmed down the night before. And so kind of at the panic, kind of I looked out the back window of my house and just saw that there was a lake in the field next to me. It was literally just water everywhere. And so kind of rushing to kind of get our last bits packed and get out of the house, and rushed out of the house, got up to the Morrisons near us, and kind of I managed to get everybody into a taxi to get them to the airport, and I stayed behind with my oldest daughter, actually largely because I had messed up with her passport, and so not because of this noble choice to stay behind in case of the drama. I physically couldn't go, so yeah, sent them off to head to the airport, and while they were en route, I bumped into my neighbour who had confirmed that the house had just begun to come underwater. It was already 2 foot at that point, and then by the end of the day, it was up to about 5 foot of water, or about 4 foot of water coming up to the house. And so, yeah, just wrecked everything in the house, really, kind of on the bottom floor. And the water ended up sitting there for 3 or 4 days in the end before they were finally able to drain it, and we were able to get back into the house and see the damage. And so, yeah, it was a pretty horrendous experience.
We have some pictures, right?
Yes, so there's our house, and that shows you kind of an aerial shot which gives you an extent of the damage. You can't actually see the river, but it's literally about 30 feet away from our house there. So yeah, a lot of water. There's actually 3 cars on our driveway which you can't see, and that's why you can't see them. That gives you a bit of a picture of how high up the water came. So believe it or not, those cars weren't drivable afterwards. We go to the next one. Yeah, that shed was also not there when we left. So again, the water just picks everything up and dumps it somewhere else. And so, yeah, go to the next one. And that's a picture of our kitchen. Now, what I'd like you to do is, actually, that door you see there, I had to get my neighbour to kind of help me, because the fridge had actually been picked up by the water and dumped at an angle against the door, so I couldn't get in. So the 2 of us had to kind of find a way to shove the door up. And now what I'd like you to do is just picture in your mind's eye the smell of all the frozen and refrigerated food that's just been sat rotting for a while, as well as the smell of flood water. And my oldest daughter has a snake, and so we had frozen mice in the freezer that had also lovely smells coming out of them as well. So yeah, just the whole place was just horrendous. The water actually came just above the countertops there. What I love about this picture, if you look into the living room, there's a little picture frame up there. And we'll show you a picture of this in a minute. That was actually a picture done by Tim Bai. He's a caricature of our whole family, and we were really worried that it was going to be destroyed. But thankfully the water didn't make it up that high, and so that's been with us everywhere we've been ever since. So yeah, there it is. So we're very thankful for Tim for painting that picture, and it's been a bit of a symbol of us as a family sticking together in all of it. I think we've got another couple of pictures in there. So there's a picture of one of our kids' playroom. Again, just highlights just how you think everything will just be back where it was, but even the things that are above the waterline just get picked up. The water just picks everything up, it floats, and it just dumps it somewhere else. And so, yeah, the majority of things, even above the waterline, were ruined.
And you can see on the right side of the water line on the wallpaper up to where the water was as well there.
I think we've got another picture. There's a wonderful team of Antioch volunteers that came to help us gut the house. We had to literally take every single one of our belongings and dump it in the garden, make notes of everything for the purpose of insurance, and take pictures of everything. So we had a fantastic team come and support us. Carol actually became the neighborhood caterer. She brought enough food for the entire neighborhood and spent most of the time just evangelizing the neighborhood with food. And I think we've got one more picture. Oh no, we've got two more. So this is Katrina's keyboard, covered in dog food. We spent quite a while, this is taken from the window outside, we'd spent quite a while trying to work out why there were pebbles on it. And then when we got in there, the smell quickly told us it was dog food, and it stank. All right, last picture. And then this is actually one of the hardest pictures for me to look at, is this was the final destination of all of our belongings. So we would literally, once we'd itemized it, it would all get carried to the end of our driveway, it would get dumped there, and then it would end up in these claws, which would just crush it, and we'd just watch everything that we owned just being crushed and then dumped in the truck and carried away, and then they'd come back for the next load. And that went on for several days as we kind of sorted through everything, which is a painful process to watch. So, yeah.
Wow. I know for me, watching from the outside, it just seemed like the ripple effects of this just kept getting wider and wider and wider. And you know, you think about the natural fabric of the house and what happened to that, but then you start to think about all the different things that were lost. What were some of those things for you, Katrina?
Yeah, so that was kind of it. You know, you start this kind of ties in with some of our grief and loss things, but you realize it's not just losing your house, it's not just losing your couch. It was, we'd built up all that stuff over it. We've been married almost 13 years now, and so down to like really small things like, oh, that was like the first cookbook I ever bought when we got married, or one of the biggest things I found out while we were away, so I was away with 3 of the girls in Slovenia. My favorite Bible had been destroyed, and so there were memories and bookmarks and things God had spoken over the years that was taken, and so it was not just an object, it was my lifeline, and I had a smaller Bible with me, which I still have to this day. But, you know, it's just, you don't want to get hung up on things, but it's not just about the things. It's the memories and what you'd built together as a family. You know, in deeper levels, we had to bump around. Before we found the house that we're in now, we had to bump around different Airbnbs while we were trying to find somewhere to stay. And if it was just Ian and I, it still would have been really tough, but we've got 4 children, and we're trying to take care of them and tend to their hearts as well through all of this. And so having to move every 2 weeks meant new school routines, meant new drives, meant new times that we had to get up in the morning, and where's the nearest grocery store to this place? Like, there were so many ripple effects that kind of had our heads spinning, I think, for quite a while as we were trying to navigate. Like, we just didn't know where to put our feet, because everything was just constantly changing. Nothing was settled, nothing was certain, and so that just, was very chaotic.
Yeah, you really, until you go through something like this, you really don't realize just how impactful it is and how many things it hits. And I remember the week after I was due to preach, and days after the flood, I was still in my head. I was like, oh yeah, I've got to write a preach this week. And like, then I went into the house and suddenly it hit me, I'm probably not going to be preaching for a good 6 months. But yeah, like so Katrina was in Slovenia, and that actually was really hard for her to process through all of this. Like, in some ways it was helpful for me because it just meant I could get on with dealing with things. But for her, that's actually really difficult, kind of doing that from afar and the communication and everything. And like, both of our cars were totaled, so we had an emergency situation where I was like, I've got a countdown to Friday when my family are coming home, and I have no way of picking them up and getting them home, and I don't even know where home's going to be. And so you basically just suddenly go into survival mode and kind of crisis mode, and everything just becomes about decisions and kind of figuring out logistics. And obviously you're wanting to grieve it all, and you feel the pain of the loss. And but firstly, you don't really have much of in the early stages, an ability to comprehend it all. And then you just don't have the capacity for it because there's just so much to think through, so much to deal with. And we ended up buying a car the week when Katrina was gone, and I thought, oh, that's one miracle that's happened, and that car turned out to be a bit of a lemon. It had a problem with the engine. The water pump had gone, and so literally it was like every 2 days I was having to top it up with coolant, and like the engine light would come on, and like you kind of get to a stage where your adrenal glands are just kind of just shot to pieces, and anything could just trigger them. And so we're kind of just trying to survive, really, and all the fun in life, all the joy, all the kind of union in marriage and everything had just gone out of the window, and it was all just what needs to get done today. And your capacity to even think through that just begins to get diminished each day. And then on top of that, we're trying to process it and grieve it and make decisions, and then we have 4 kids who are all going through the same process of grief and upheaval and and the kids don't have the same kind of ability to process or even verbalize what they're experiencing in the same way that we do. And so us trying to navigate, how do we like walk 4 children through this while we're still trying to figure it all out ourselves? And so, yeah, it just began a long journey of really just being in survival mode for several months while we kind of went through that process. And we eventually got into a long-term place, which is the place you'll all get to visit. But then kind of it really became apparent just the impact it had. And actually, the first week that it happened while the kids were away, I was having nightmares. Like I was having literal stress dreams with my kids being swept away in a flood or just different situations like that. And then kind of getting into the house, it was almost like we all began to breathe a little bit. And then it was pretty much every night, 1 or 2 of the kids would be coming in having had nightmares that were similar of us being separated as a family and all these things. And so, yeah, then it just became this long process of like, how do we kind of emotionally process this with the kids and help them through it as well?
So one of the things that we want to learn, I think something that we're kind of weak at as the church, like not just our church, but the evangelical world in general, is giving permission to people to grieve and to acknowledge their losses. And, sometimes we can feel pressure when we come to church to, put on a happy face and pretend like everything is great, and actually everything's not great. And we really want our church to be a place where you can come and not be okay. Where you can come and say, hey, actually things aren't, there's not like a nice God story to like, a nice little bow to wrap up the pain I'm going through. And I think it's something that we are learning about, something I'm learning about, is how do we grow in learning how to acknowledge grief and loss. And it always astonishes me that 2/3 of the Psalms are actually laments, where the psalmist is acknowledging all the things that they've lost and all the pain they're experiencing and giving some very raw emotion towards God, And that seems to be a model for us of how we can be emotionally honest with God. So with you guys, one of the things I've been really impressed with is the way that you have been very honest with your grief and loss. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think just pulling out something that you said there about the Psalms, I don't know if anybody else has done this, but in the past, I used to read through the Psalms, and there's the ones that are like happy, and you're like, yes, I'll read this one, and then you get to the laments, and you're like, oh, that doesn't feel very good, I'll just skip that one, and then we move on to the whatever next happy chapter there is. But that's not life. That's not real life. You can't just skip the unhappy parts. You can't just like skip over suffering. And so having something like this happen helps you realize you cannot avoid suffering. It is part of the broken world that we live in. And so if you can't avoid it, the best response is to face it. Otherwise, you just drown. Nice term I used there, drowning and flooding. I can laugh about this. So in honesty, it's been really, really, really hard and really painful, because not only do you have your own thoughts, but then you have the thoughts of the enemy going in there as well. And so for part of my healing was recognizing, so I had a bit of counseling, and they helped me go through this worksheet called the Cascade of Losses. And it was a bit of what I was talking about earlier of, it's not just I lost my house or I lost my car, but those also have like secondary impacts. So losing a car meant I didn't have freedom to go where I wanted when I wanted, and that meant I felt a little bit trapped and isolated. Like there's always so much more to the initial impact that you realize. And so in order to actually heal from something, I learned you have to follow the trail. You have to follow like the deepest part of that trail, because that's where it's actually really affected your heart. There's the surface level things, but your heart's been wounded. And so following that trail all the way was not easy, but it's, if you think of a wound and there's dirt in there, you can't just keep putting a plaster if there's like rubble in your skin. It's just going to keep getting infected. And I was very aware of the nastiness, the pain inside of me, but I also wanted to heal. I didn't want to stay in that place. I knew it was hurting me, and it was hurting those around me. And part of that healing was also being willing to vocalize, talk about the dark things, the painful things. There were days where I questioned God's goodness. There were days when I thought, is this all real? Like, is he really real? I'm not sure. And it was exposing just things in me, and I was focusing on the pain and the darkness. But I needed to vocalize those things, otherwise they would have stayed inside. And when they stay in, they take root and they become truths, and I know that's not true. So I had to tell people about that and expose kind of the lies that I was facing. And there were a few times where, whether it was with Ian or close friends or with the counselors, where I basically had to ask permission to grieve certain things because I felt stupid for it. I was like, is it okay that I feel really sad about this thing? And just to hear somebody say, of course it's okay to grieve that. Like, don't feel silly. That hurt you, and so be sad about it. Like don't stay in the pit, but it's okay that you're there. It just helps hearing that and to be given permission to feel what I wanted to feel and needed to feel without this expectation of like the rainbow side of it, because there wasn't always rainbows. Some of it was dark and painful, and so just being willing to follow those trails, being willing to be real with the big and small things that had hurt, made a huge difference.
Yeah, I think I would say like there were several things in terms of like what was really helpful for us in this grief process. And one actually was Todd and Lauren just really kind of releasing us from all church work for several months actually. And again, this was one of those things where like you just don't have the ability to actually comprehend what you've got capacity for. And I was like, I could probably still do all these things. And thankfully, I have a boss and a brother-in-law who loves me enough to say, actually, I think you probably could do with just taking the time off. And that was such a game changer for us because it meant we could just focus on the crisis that we were in, essentially. And as I mentioned, for several months, it really just was, what can we do to get through today? Like, what decisions need to be made and what things need to be sorted out? What needs to be communicated with these people? What do I need to do with the insurance? And by the end of the day, you're just absolutely exhausted. And there were two things that really kind of, again, it's funny how many times flood or water analogies are really useful in this kind of situation. But a lot of the time I felt like I was just below the water level and just being dragged under. And it was everything I could do just to get above it. And for several months there were two things in particular, or three things in particular that were really helpful in terms of getting through that process. One was actually silence and solitude. And interestingly, we were literally in a series on silence and solitude when all this happened. And so it was pretty fresh for me. I'd actually already been spending the last month practicing it because I thought, this isn't something I do that often. If I'm going to be sharing a message on it, I want to actually be living it a bit. And so I'd already begun doing a kind of devotional plan where I was like practicing this. But one of the things that we say with silence and solitude is that you will discover things about yourself in silence and solitude. And when I kind of just sat to be with Jesus, I would just begin with like a prayer to enter into his presence and just focus on him and just pay attention to what came up in me. And often they were pretty negative, pretty painful, pretty horrible things. And we, as a as society, tend to be pretty bad at dealing with those. We tend to experience them and want to push them away and kind of get back to the good feelings again. But really, that's kind of just a bad way of medicating and rather than dealing with the problem. And so I made a point of, in those times, just really kind of forcing myself to enter into them and just deal with what came up and just seek Jesus in those moments, seek his peace, seek his presence, and seek his kind of healing in that. And the next one is equally spiritual, but probably doesn't sound like it to many. I took a lot of naps. And I'm serious. Like, when you go through grief, your capacity is so diminished. Your ability to think straight, your energy levels, everything is so diminished. And honestly, I would say, if I'm not a doctor, but I would say to anybody going through grief, like, I would prescribe a certain amount of naps per day because it helps. And I don't think I would have been able to kind of deal with some of these things if I didn't do that. And then I think that the final thing was community. I cannot imagine what it would have been like to go through this without all of you lot. I cannot imagine what it would have been like to do this on my own strength and without the support. And we had so many people surrounding us with prayer, surrounding us and just kind of supporting us and taking care of some of the practical things, taking care of logistics, kind of being point people for communication across the church, and just people that we could just be around. It was such a helpful, healing part of that process. But then as time went on, come January, once the dust had settled, we were in our new place, perhaps the most powerful two things that I did was I went on a personal retreat. And we often say that God can do more in 2 or 3 or 4 days on a personal retreat than he can do in several years in your life. And that has just always rung true to me with this. And so I took a couple of days, went off to a retreat center and just began to process through everything that had happened. I actually felt like God wanted me to start just by listing out everything that I could remember from the time of the flood until that day. And I wrote 4 pages worth of notes, and some of them good, some of them bad, some of them just random things that just whatever came to mind. And then I felt like he was just asking me to go through what were the things that I felt I had lost, what are the things that I was grieving, where are my disappointments, and just began to kind of, again, list those things out. And just, again, it gave me this space where all I had to focus on was my heart and tending to that with Jesus. And it's amazing just through that process, some of the things, and I'll share a bit later, some of the things that God began to speak that were just really healing in that process. So, yeah.
Wow. So much to say there, but I love what both of you are saying, but I love, Katrina, you're talking about getting to those raw emotions. And, a lot of times in the church, we can feel like, certain emotions are okay. We can be joyful, we can be excited about something, but when it comes, especially to the harder emotions like sadness or anger or grief, we can tend to bury those, or even doubt. You were talking about some of the doubts that you were having. We all experience those things. And the pressure that we often feel as believers is, I'm not being faithful to God, I'm not being a good Christian, I'm not being a good witness if I acknowledge that hey, I'm not feeling tip-top, and that maybe I'm angry, maybe I'm sad, maybe I'm depressed, whatever. And the thing is that what you don't bring into the light grows. These types of things, they're not going to go away if you just shove them down. What will happen is either it either causes our hearts to just grow numb and callous and we just can't feel anything, or it just waits until an inopportune moment and it emerges. And so what you did that I think is so good is you brought community into it. You shared what you were feeling. You didn't try to hide it and put on a brave face. That's brilliant. And then, and then talking about going back to following the wound. It's not just what happens. All of us experience various traumas and challenges in life. And the pressure is, hey, just get over it. Like God is good. Let's move on. And that, sometimes that's all you need. But sometimes if it's a deep wound, you have to go past just what happened. You've got to go to the impact of what happened. And those ripple effects can go quite deep. And so I really love what they did, what they call a cascade of losses. And so if you're in that place this morning, I'd really encourage you to do that yourself. If you're struggling with something you just can't seem to move past, maybe doing that exercise of cascade of losses would be really good. And then what Ian is saying about making space for God, whether it's practicing silence and solitude in your daily life, or like getting alone and going on a retreat with God, those are the times when God can just impact us and transform us in ways that we don't really even imagine as possible. And I can just say from the outside looking in, Ian before that retreat and Ian after that retreat was like two different people. And you agree, Katrina? No, and that's not a knock on Ian. It's just like, it was incredible to see. I mean, anybody would be struggling after what you went through, but it's just, it was like tangible the way that God had met with him and brought healing to his heart. So let that encourage you, that God can heal your heart wherever you're at this morning. So you've mentioned a little bit of this already, but I'd love for you to go into, we as a church, we want to be a people. I did a series on suffering back in February, and one of the messages was all about how we care for people that are in suffering. Because sadly, Christians are often really bad at caring for people in suffering. And so we talked about that and what things that we can do to help people. And the encouraging thing is that you guys did a lot of this long before I did that series. So just could you share a few of the things that were helpful for you in the midst of all this?
Yeah, so I actually took some time to write a bit of a list, and I'll be honest, the list is long enough that I might not get through it, and even if I did, it wouldn't be everybody. So if I don't mention you, it doesn't mean it wasn't impactful, but there's just some things in particular that people did that were just so helpful. One, actually, the Sawyers, for those you know the Sawyers, they're some of our closest friends, and I remember when Katrina was still in Slovenia, I came to kind of do all the work on the house and ended up spending the night at their house that evening, and I got there, and they said one of the most helpful lines, which is, what do you need? They didn't kind of try and relate to the suffering or anything like that. It was just a simple question of, what do you need? And at that point, like, I was done with decisions. I was done with, like, processing through it. Just been a really heavy day of emptying my house out. And to be honest, I had a couple of emails that I needed to send, and I just kind of just wanted to watch some TV. And so we didn't really talk that much that evening, but we just sat and watched David Attenborough talk. And honestly, it was so helpful just to be able to be there and just be around people that I know and love, who know and love me, and know I can just be myself around. And yeah, that was just super healing. We also had whilst Katrina was in Slovenia, and I began to get a picture of what was happening with the house, with the floodwaters going down, and what needed to happen when we got in. I arranged a phone call with a select people in the church that I knew would be able to support us and kind of do certain things. And I, at this point, hadn't really had much time to emotionally process any of it. And it's actually, Katrina was talking about, like, the power of community and sharing with other people. Like, this was the first time I was really actually about to talk to anybody about what had happened. And on the call, I just broke down and started crying. And I hadn't done that yet, I hadn't gone to that place yet. And one of the things that was actually just really helpful was they all just sat there and waited. I think often when somebody's going through that, we feel this need to, like, rush in and comfort and kind of reassure and all that. And they didn't do any of that. And actually, that was perfect. Like, they just sat there and waited, and I was able to just feel what I felt. And then when I was ready, I was able to then just carry on. And so I just learned the power of just sitting with somebody in their pain and grief and in their emotions, and not feeling this need to do anything. Carol, the amount of organizing, and she became kind of like our unofficial PA, kind of, but more than a PA, she's running around kind of organizing things, meal trains and all these different things. Lucy kind of became a point person of all communication and doing different things. And yeah, you guys, when it comes to food, you pull out all the stops, you go for it. We had to, at one point, say, actually, we need to go to every other day providing meals, because it was about 3 meals worth that we were getting. And you guys can cook, I can say that. Yeah, and again, I remember we kind of went down to my parents for Christmas, and again, it was just another opportunity to kind of, everything was said and done by that point. We could shut off a little bit from all the practicals, and I sat with my parents and just began to process over a couple of hours with them. And again, they didn't try and teach how I should feel. They didn't try and kind of reassure. They didn't try and relate to it in any way. They just allowed us to, they validated the grief. They validated the losses. And that was just, that in itself was just really healing. It's hard to explain how powerful it is for someone to just say, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. And yeah, that's really healing. And then I would say the Pete's, Jack's not here today, he's working, Emily's here, and they really intentionally pursued us as friends in a season when we had zero capacity to pursue other people. They continued to pursue us, and it helps that they live pretty close to us, but they would regularly be at our house, kind of taking care of us, taking care of the kids, and just kind of, it just meant a lot to us to have people around us that were just able to support us on a friendship level as well. So,
I mean, you've said most people. There's a lot more, though, but just even as a church community, like, people just asking how we're doing, even people that I don't know that well, it helps you feel seen in the midst of a place where you feel very alone because no one else is going through that. And so it's hard to explain sometimes how you're doing and how it's making you feel when everyone else's life is carrying on, but yours is just like exploded or imploded or both. Like everything felt like it was falling apart. And so just the check-ins or the text messages of just thinking of you, how are you doing? How can I pray? Just helped us feel so covered and seen and looked after. And so if I listed everyone's names there, we'd be here all day. But just, yeah, thank you for the ways that you each have kind of intentionally prayed and reached out, because it really, really did make a difference.
yeah, actually, that reminds me, prayer was such a big part of this. I remember explaining to Todd at one point, we knew that so much of this was spiritual warfare. It wasn't just the flood, it was all these other knock-on effects and all these other issues that kind of crept up in the process. And we kind of knew we had to kind of contend in prayer, but our capacity to do that was so diminished. Like really, our prayer life just became, God, would you just get me through this day? God, would you just help me, guide me? And honestly, it became about more just tending to my own heart. And we didn't have capacity to fight in that way. And we knew we had a whole bunch of people in this church that were praying for us. We have an intercession team that were praying for us regularly. And that meant so much to us. We felt those prayers. And it's a very hard thing to explain, like what I mean by I felt those prayers, but we knew people were praying for us. We could tell that we were being covered in that way. And yeah, again, I think that's such a crucial part of kind of that whole process, and that healing process was knowing that we were being covered in prayer by so many different people.
Wow. Well done, church, for caring for them so well. And, obviously, whether you were a part of that or not, probably all know somebody who is going through something difficult right now. And I just want to encourage you to take what they've just said and ask yourself, hey, is there some way I can apply that? Caring for people in need doesn't need to be complicated or difficult. Sometimes it's just a simple text message, like they said. So maybe as we go through, as you're listening to that, you can apply this. How can I actually care for and extend the comfort that God has comforted me with? How can I extend that to somebody else? All right, guys, well, thinking over it's been about 8.5 months now since this happened. As you look back over the last 8.5 months, how what has God taught you, and how have you experienced his goodness in these 8.5 months?
Yeah, so this might take about 6 months, so settle in. There's a lot that you learn about God and a lot you learn about yourself when you go through suffering. But one of the things that I've always, this isn't the first time I've been through kind of grief and trauma and this kind of thing. And one of the things that I'm very aware of is how easy we have a tendency to kind of question God when these things happen and begin to hold him at arm's length. And the analogy I give is like, if one of my kids fell over and they hurt their knee, their response is not to kind of get angry with me and say, Daddy, how could you let that happen to me? Why did that happen? And start questioning my character. They come running to me with open arms, and as a result, they're able to experience healing and restoration. And I wanted to make sure that I was doing the latter with God. But we often, our response with God is often God, why did you allow this to happen? And I knew the dangers of that and kind of how that can just push me away from God and actually hinder me from being able to experience his healing. I'm literally pushing away the very thing that can bring healing. And so I just made very clear intentions of just pressing into Jesus. And I was actually kind of laughing a little bit as we were worshiping earlier, because I remember the first time I came back into church, and it was kind of everything we could do just to walk into the room, because we knew like people would have questions, and our minds were already so much on it that we kind of didn't want to answer the questions. And actually, you guys did great with that. But we walked in with all those fears, and I remember just standing on the front row and just like bawling my way through worship, like just weeping the whole way through, and just feeling really low, but knowing like I have to press into Jesus. If I don't press into Jesus, I don't know where this will go. And so just that intentionality and just being able to sit there and kind of laughing a little bit, because like, wow, look at where I am now. And really the theme that I've seen in all of this is just how capable God is of bringing restoration. I really believe there's nothing that he can't restore. And we're still in that journey. We're not back into our house yet, but I feel like God has already done so much restoration. I remember we were kind of in an Airbnb trying to sort out somewhere to live. We've got 4 kids and 3 pets, and so we're not the easiest of people to relocate. The insurance company has a relocation firm that they use, and they were trying to find us somewhere to live, but they're not based in Sheffield. They don't know the area. They don't know our family, and so they were sending all these places through that were just in really bad locations for us in terms of work and school, and they were like really small houses that we could have survived in, but the thought of being in them for 6 to 12 months did not sound great to us at all. It would have been survival. These were just all that seemed to keep coming through. And I just remember I got to one particular point where I was just like with Jesus and like just raw and be like, Jesus, I need you to give me a more spacious place. I need you to provide somewhere that's in a good location and that is spacious for us so that we can actually settle and do life in it. And that was kind of it. And I went onto my Silence and Solitude daily plan, and each one has a scripture in it. And that scripture was this one here. It's Psalm 118, verse 5, which says, "When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and he led me into a spacious place." And so, again, just choosing to, I could have just been angry with God in that moment. And there were definitely times where throughout the journey that was what happened. But I chose to press into Jesus. I chose to seek him in my pain, seek him in my suffering. And I walked away with this promise that God gave me a promise of, I'm going to give you a spacious place. And I think when he gave me that, he was laughing because he knew what he was going to give us. And it was far beyond what I could have comprehended. As I said, you're all going to get to come and visit and experience the blessing of that promise in a couple of weeks' time. But we have a house. It's literally a farmhouse. It's out in the middle of the countryside. And for those who know, I love the countryside. I've always wanted to live in the countryside, in a farmhouse. And this house is probably, I don't know, twice the size of our actual home. And it's got a huge garden. It's got an orchard. I mean, anyone else here have an orchard? Yeah, Nate's got an orchard. So we have an orchard, we have just loads and loads of space, a farm next to us, and we have sheep in the field next to us that the farmer has asked us to go and tend to. And so part of my healing process has been go and stand in a field. It's on this top of a hill, and just look out at the view, count some sheep, and just enjoy being in nature and just the silence of it. And so it's just so healing and powerful. And that spacious place has been such a place of restoration from us. And it's even owned by a lord. How cool is that? It's literally Lord and Lady Scarborough that own the house. And so we're basically royalty now. Just this theme of healing just kept coming through. And one of the things that God actually exposed in me, like I say, you kind of go through this process, and there's things that stand strong and there's things that don't. He really began to expose my self-sufficiency in places I didn't realize was there. And, when you go through a crisis, there's only so long you can run on your own steam. There is in life anyway, but particularly when you go through something really traumatic like that, you burn out pretty quick. And particularly around December time, I hit a really low place. And I remember just saying to Katrina, I actually don't like who I am. I don't like myself. But it was because I was trying to make all these things happen. I was trying to be strong for my family. I was trying to get through everything. And I was doing these little things to just to kind of top up the engine level a little bit with kind of being with Jesus and silence and solitude, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't carrying that through into relying on him in the journey, and that's a really big part of what this process was. And just kind of began to speak to me about what are my foundations. We have another scripture here. It's painful, actually, how relevant this one is to our situation. Many of you will know it. It says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the flood waters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse, but it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolishness, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Again, it's kind of ironic how a passage about flooding in the Bible kind of just highlighted our situation and kind of began to expose like the self-reliancy, self-sufficiency, and do things in my own strength was an area of my life where I had built it on the sand. And God was using this whole process to actually, even though it was painful, to redirect that and actually build it on Him, build it on His direction and follow His leadership. And there were many ways where this process actually highlighted where I had built it on the solid rock as well. And we've always been a couple that right from the beginning have always said yes to Jesus. Whatever it is to Jesus, it's yes. And choosing to trust Him and lean into Him in that process was part of that solid rock. If we'd learn how to do that in the easy places, we'd learn how to do that in the day-to-day of just continuing to be with Jesus, continuing to learn how to spend time with Jesus in the day-to-day, to where we were able to carry that into our place of real suffering and real pain. And one of the things that you notice there is that the builder builds the house before the flood. When the flood comes, it's not really the time to be building. It's the time to just stand. And so this is something that you can't just develop that intimacy and that relationship with Jesus in that place. It will expose what is there. And so really the foundation is laid now. The foundation is laid before you get into that place of suffering. So what are you doing now to really develop that intimate relationship with Jesus, to really know who He is and to know how He sees you and all these different things? When you lay those down and you go through suffering, you carry that with you into it, and it gives you the strength to walk through it. And so, yeah, it became this process of really kind of learning what our foundations were, as well as kind of just seeing God kind of restoring unity, restoring our souls, restoring union within our marriage. We became a great team, but about 3 months into it, even though we'd spent all this time together, one of the key phrases that we kept saying to each other was, "I really miss you." Like we'd spent all this time together doing all these things, but we'd just not had the union that you should have in marriage, like just the joy and the fun together. And so just seeing God kind of help us to process through the grief with each other and kind of work through that process and get healing there and kind of get back to that place of union has been a real powerful one. But one final thing before I let Katrina share is, as I said, I went onto the personal retreat, and this was huge. Again, that whole self-reliance thing, like my assessment of this was like, how well did I conduct myself going through all of this? And as I said, I got to a point where I was like, I don't really like myself. I don't like who I've become in all of this and what is exposed in me. And I felt like, as I was asking God to speak into everything, I felt like He just said, look up all the scriptures surrounding crowns. And so I just began to I've got a kind of list at the back of my Bible, a concordance thing, so just began to go through it and look up the different references. And firstly, I found it really hard to receive them because I felt like I had failed, like I hadn't done well, that I hadn't come through it perfectly. And I just felt like I was saying that was not the goal of this. The goal was that you would continue to press into me, that you continue to seek me in this. And it's amazing how many of these passages in the Bible that feature crowns are about restoration. They're kind of stories of the Israelites kind of being brought back out of slavery and how the kind of beauty for ashes, that passage has got a reference to a crown in it, and it's all about Israel being brought out of Babylon and kind of being given the land again, being brought back to a place of joy. And one of the things I felt like my biggest losses was just a loss of a sense of joy in life. And so God just give me that promise of that He would bring joy back in. But one of them in particular was James I think it's James 1:12. I don't think we've got it on the screen, but it says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test of time, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him." And that was just was such a healing thing for me, just realizing that the power of being able to press in. Your faith and your love for Jesus is always going to be tested when you go through suffering, when you go through trials, and to be able to kind of just receive that from Jesus, that he's given me the crown of life in this. And just that's who he is, that he is a God of restoration. He is a God who meets us in our pain, in our suffering, and he's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for people who just seek him and just trust in him in the process.
So I'll share a bit of some practical ways that I think we experience God's goodness, and then just some of the lessons that I learned. So even looking back to, Ian described kind of the morning of when we got the knock at the door, I actually felt amongst like fear, confusion, what in the world, I felt really covered by the Lord in that moment, because we had our bags packed. We were ready to go. We had our passports, our licenses, like our most important things, as well as, stuff to live in. We were ready to go, like literally about 5 minutes about to walk out the door. If we hadn't been preparing to leave, like we would have had nothing ready and would have been scrambling and stressed out. We also had our teammates with us. We had Jack and Emily, we had Kaylin and Yin there. And thankfully we didn't actually have to like trudge through water up to the grocery store. But we needed help carrying all the massive suitcases and getting our kids up this hill, because back in October, it's still like pitch black at 6 a.m. So it's dark and rainy, and we're all like, our world's just exploded. Yeah.
And your neighbors thought that you were like the fastest packers.
Yeah.
Because
it was hilarious. Like the whole neighborhood was out in their pajamas, kind of looking bewildered and tired and kind of confused. And then us, like an army of people marching through with suitcases, and they all just kind of. You could see the kind of thought process of that. Should we be doing that?
Yeah, so we were ready. And that just showed me, just like in our spiritual walk with God, like if Jesus came back, like right now, are you ready? Like, is your heart ready? Have you given your life to him, not just in terms of like receiving salvation, but it's the parable of the 10 virgins who'd run out of oil. Like, are you tending to the oil of your heart? Are you filling it up? Because that's what matters. It does not matter at the end of the day how much wealth you've acquired or what degrees you got. It's, have you said yes to Jesus? Have you tended to your heart to love him and honor him and obey him? Like, that's what he's looking for, is his bride, his children. And so it just so much even through that he was showing his goodness already. Again, community's been huge. Like, on the one hand, while our experience felt isolating, I never felt alone. Like, I knew there were always people, anyone that I could turn to talk with, to pray with, to cry with, to do life with, and family that was constantly supporting us. Financially, so we don't have storehouses of money, but God does. And so when the immediate impact happened, when we moved into the place that we're staying in now, it didn't have a fridge freezer because, and we'd lost that in the flood. It didn't have a washing machine or dryer because we'd lost those in the flood, and we didn't have the money to get those. But so many people inside and outside of the church gave to us so generously that we were able to buy like the necessities of things that we need. We had no kitchen items because those got taken out by the flood. So we had a semi-traumatizing, we went to IKEA all excited, like, yes, we get to buy new stuff. And we walked in and we're like, oh my gosh, we have to pick everything. And it got really overwhelming. So we just chose to get meatballs instead. Can't go wrong with meatballs. But just the provision that he gave to us financially was incredible. And so just tying into that, some of the lessons that I learned is you'll find what you're looking for. If you're looking for all the darkness and woe is me and my life sucks right now, you're going to find that. because it's there. You can't deny that things are hard, but that's not all there is to life. And this whole world is full of suffering, but as believers, we have something more. We have Jesus Christ, our living hope, inside of us. And so I made a commitment from the very beginning that I was going to look for him. And James 4:8 says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And so I committed from early on to look for him. God, where are you at in this situation? And again, not, as Ian was saying, not in an accusatory way, like, where are you? What are you doing? Like, I wasn't pointing the finger, but I was inviting him in. God, would you show me where you are right now? Can you show me how you see me or how you see my family? Can you show me what you're doing? Even just today, just what are you doing today? How can I, think your thoughts instead of mine right now? And so that was huge. And again, like Ian said, this was all choices, so I could have chosen not to do those things. And sometimes those choices were hard, but we spent years making those choices. And so when it came to suffering and crisis, we knew where to go. We knew what to do because we'd already trained ourselves and disciplined ourselves to turn to him. And so it still was hard because I still felt the pain and reality and the suffering, but I'd done it enough times to know it's always worth saying yes to Jesus. It's always worth turning to him. Like his hope, his love, his truth never disappoints. Everything else does. Everything else does. If I had just looked to Ian for strength, he would have fallen short. No offense.
And I did.
But it's so easy to do that too. If you're married or to your children or to your job or everything else is going to let you down, but Jesus will not. And so that was something huge, just making that choice from the get-go. Something that God showed me while we were in Slovenia. Actually, I have really fond memories of this. So I had 3 of the kids, and that meant very little alone time. But what I did do was get up really early in the morning, and I would spend time with Jesus on the bathroom floor in the hotel room, because that was the only space I could be alone. And yeah, actually, it's very fond memories. Sitting on that bathroom floor, in the freshness of everything's just happened. I'm separated from Ian. I don't know what to do. But just reaching out to him and allowing him to just love me where I was at. I didn't need answers. I probably wouldn't have even gotten them if I'd asked. But I did need him, and I needed him to be with me. And something that on a previous mission trip, we were chatting with some people and talking about how do I know if I've spent time with God today? And there's that scripture in the Lord's Prayer that says, give us this day our daily bread. And so kind of ask yourself the question, have I eaten? Because with our physical bodies, if you've eaten or not. You're either hungry or you're satisfied. And so spiritually to ask, have I eaten today? I'm trying to pray or I'm trying to worship or read the word, but is it satisfying my soul? And so I learned that question, and I come back to that a lot. But a fresh thing that God showed me, I had, the week before that, had gone on a women's retreat, and we got handed these daily prayer sheets, and in that was praying armor of God. And so I had already been praying that prayer daily, because, and again, retrospectively, I needed that. And so I continued to pray that daily, and so God was just showing me another thing to ask myself, when we're in the middle of feeling attacked or exposed or afraid, to ask yourself the question, have I gotten dressed today? Really simple questions. Have I eaten? Have I gotten dressed? Spiritually, have I put on the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth? Am I wearing these things? Because I'm feeling pretty vulnerable right now. Another thing that I added to that clothing was the garment of praise. And that one's been huge for me. I love worship, because that has been my way through so many things in life, including this one. And so choosing to put that garment of praise around me has enabled me to stand. And I love that with the armor of God passage. You put all these things on, and then God's not saying, now go out and slay those giants. He actually just says, now stand firm. And so just remembering, like, just to stand in the goodness of God and trust him to fight those battles for me has been so, so good. There's probably a lot more I could say, but I want to make sure we've got time for other stuff. So
I think that's great. Yeah. Do you guys have any closing thoughts that you want to share?
No, I think just two kind of challenges really for you guys is just where are your foundations? Like, what foundations are you building on now? And for those of you who are in a place of suffering right now, whatever that may be, I just want to encourage you that God is here. Like, and there's nothing that he cannot restore. So.
Yeah. Amen. Well, guys, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but thank you. On behalf of the whole church, thank you for modeling what it looks like to walk with God through the midst of devastation and through suffering, and to model for us what it means to wrestle through the questions and all the painful emotions and the doubts and everything, and actually experience his restoration and being an example of what that looks like. So we're so thankful and so proud of you for the ways you've walked through this, and thank you for being willing to share so vulnerably today. Are you thankful, church? All right, well, there is so much we can do with something like that. We don't just want to listen to a great story and be like, oh, that's awesome. I think for every single one of us, there is a place of application today. So worship team, if you want to make your way up here, I know we're about out of time here, but I don't want to move out of this moment without taking the time to respond. So in a moment, our band's going to lead us in some worship, but I'd like to invite our whole prayer team to come down in just a moment and just be available. And I'd like, if you guys would be available. And maybe today you're in a place of real loss, and you're where they were in the months immediately following the flooding of their house. And you just need community, you need people around you, you need hope to be restored in you, then I want you to respond today. Come down, let us pray for you. There's something about, the temptation is we always want to stay in our seats because it's a lot more comfortable. We can stay in hiding, it's less vulnerable, but there's, as I always say, you don't want to go to church and then walk back out carrying the same burdens that you walked in here with. So let us pray with you. Let's give God the chance to minister to you today. Or maybe, like Ian was talking about, crowns and restoration, and you're needing restoration in your life. Maybe that what's happened is in the distant past, but you're still, you haven't experienced that restoration yet. Or there's so many different places, and maybe I haven't mentioned the one that specifically applies to you, but don't walk out of here today without taking something from this, because they've walked through suffering. Let's glean from the wisdom that they have learned and find the place of application in our own life. So let's stand, and I'm going to pray, and then we'll move into our time, our worship, and close. So, Father, thank you for the way that you have restored the Mertons. Thank you, Lord, for their life. Thank you for their faithfulness, their integrity, and the ways they have walked with you through this. Thank you for the ways that you have sustained them and upheld them. And, Lord, I pray for us as a church, Lord, that you would meet with us in the places of loss, in the places of grief, in the places where we're needing to be restored. Thank you, Lord, that you said that in Psalm 23, you are our good shepherd, and part of what you're doing is you're restoring our souls. So would you come and restore our souls this morning in Jesus' name? Amen. All right, if our prayer teams could come down front, staff, if you could be available to pray for people. And then as we worship, if you need prayer, please come up front. Please don't be shy. This is not the time for you to hold back. This is a time to step out in faith. All right, so prayer teams, go ahead and make your way to the front, and let's worship.
Overwhelmed, and I cannot hear your voice. I hold on to what is true, though I cannot see. And if the storms of life they come, and the road ahead gets steep, I I will lift these hands in faith. I will believe. Let's just sing it one more time. If my heart is overwhelmed and I cannot hear your voice, I hold on to what is true, though I cannot see. If the storms of life they come and the road ahead gets steep, I will lift these hands in faith. I will believe. And I remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your Son. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high or valley low, I sing out and remind my soul that I am yours. I am forever yours. When my heart is filled with hope and every promise comes my way, and I feel your hands of grace rest upon me. Staying desperate for you, God, staying humble at your feet, I will lift these hands and praise. I will believe, and I remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your Son. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours. I am forever yours. Mountain high or valley low, I sing out and remind my soul that I am yours. I am forever yours. Love came down. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours. I am forever yours. Mountain high or valley low, I sing out and remind my soul that I am yours. I am forever yours. I am yours. I am yours. For all my days, Jesus, I am yours. I am yours. I am yours. For all my days, Jesus, I am yours. Sing it out. I am yours. I am yours. For all my days, Jesus, I am yours. 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 Sing it out. I'm yours. I am yours. I am yours. For all my days, Jesus, I am yours. I am yours. I am yours. For all my days, Jesus, I am yours. Love came down. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours. I am forever yours. Mountain Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours, I am forever yours. Mountain high or valley low, I sing out and remind my soul that I am yours, I am forever yours.
So we're going to close the service there. Thank you so much for being here today. But if you're being prayed for, we're going to continue to pray down front. So the band, I'm going to have the band just continue to play for a little bit longer. If you need prayer this morning, you can come and be prayed for. We're not done yet, so there's people available down here. If you are needing prayer today, as I said, please don't walk out carrying the same burdens that you came in here with. But for the rest of you, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to be serving hot drinks in a minute. If you're a guest, please come over to the Connect Point. We'd love to meet you, get to know you. We have a gift for you. But for the rest of you, God bless you, and we will see you next week.